Okay, I think that we want to begin here because we have some really interesting information to share about an update on police reform, which we have been working on for quite some time. So I want to extend our welcome to Barbara Atwell, who's with the Berkeley Friends and has been kind enough to volunteer to share with us some of the updates happening more or less every quarter. So if you would begin, Barbara, and then we will have a little time for a question and answer for you as well. So Barbara Atwell.
Thank you. And Rochelle, if you could tell me how much time I have.
So you have about 10 minutes to share with us the updates that you've come to bring, and then about 5 minutes thereafter for any questions that those arise.
Okay. Yeah, it won't take that long. But I am a yacker, so you got to cut me off if I do go over. So, hi, everybody. It's all Mark's fault. Mark Pilisuk inspired me to work with Ashby Village about 1.5 years ago, and we had a very productive collaboration. Got a couple of super good panel discussions, in my humble opinion, and also some other good direct action things happening. So what I was going to thank you, Mark. It's so good to see you. So, my goal, I'm going to read this because I'm a little nervous. So I want to give you an overview of the racial justice work that's been happening in the East Bay. It's all of these projects welcome new participants. So I want this to be interactive. If you have questions, and I can talk to anybody about the details of any of these issues offline. Okay, sound good? So the Berkeley Friends Racial Justice Action Team started out as a study team, right? And we worked on watching 13th and reading books and having worship sharing. And then we decided we were tired of talking about it. And we changed our name to the Racial Justice Action Team. So what we do is, what our goal is, to make our community safer, disrupt white supremacy. And we're doing that through reimagining public safety as well as the demilitarization. Those are the two initiatives that we have. And we've been partnering with the American Friends Service Committee for the last 2.5 years. Can everybody hear me? Everybody hear me?
There's a lot of background.
Yeah, if people don't mind, I'll mute for a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that'll help. And it'll be a little less distracting for me. So, yeah. So, Laura, could you go on mute, please?
No.
I know how that wind is. Post, put somebody on mute, please. Thank you so much. All right, and there's Margot. Hey, Margot. So what I was going to explain is that the Quakers have been partnering with the American Friends Service Committee. Okay, sorry, I can't hear myself, so. All right.
Can you mute everybody?
I was hoping somebody could, please. Okay, I'll do the best I can here. So we've been working with the American Friends Service Committee for about 2.5 years, and the basis of all of their work nationally. So now I'm muted. So can you hear me now? Beautiful. So the basis of American Friends Service Committee is a document called North Star, and I will share that with you if there's time, but I can also send it to Julie and share with the whole group. So with the National American Friends Service team, we've worked on Think Twice campaign, the Restorative Justice webinars, and the Atlanta-based Stop Cop City initiative. So I'll give you a little more detail about that. The Think Twice webinars is something I was very fortunate to participate in as far as editing and facilitating and so forth. And we're educating our communities on thinking twice before calling the police. So there are 4 webinars. They are free, they are online, and I will send that link. And the idea is to have each of you consider taking a pledge to think twice before calling the police. So lots more detail around that. And then on the national level, Stop Cop City, has anybody heard of that? Yeah, Okay, so I'll just give you an overview. Organizations are watching carefully what's happening in Atlanta and the potential implications for policing nationwide. This is a quote: "The movement to stop Cop City in Atlanta is important to communities everywhere because many are see precious resources squandered while millions of dollars go towards militarized and violent policing, and repression of protest endangers all of our movements. If this construction is completed, the Cop City will be the largest police training facility in the country and includes military-grade training facilities, a mock city to practice urban warfare, all built in the middle of I believe it's considered a prime forest. They're going to razz that forest in order to build the training center. The project itself checks on all three environmental racism criteria: race-based discrimination in environment policymaking, enforcement of regulation laws, and targeting communities of color for the citing of toxic and polluting industries, resulting in disproportionate harm." So you will see more of that in the news. There was a protest and 15 hours of public comment on June 7th. The city council did pass or authorize that to move forward, but there's a nationwide effort to have a resolution put on their city council voting and their city voting, which I'll tell you about when I hear about it. The other one is the Restorative Justice online series. If you or anybody that you work with wants to incorporate restorative justice into your life, this is a series of group, they call it a cohort, to gain hands-on experience on skills needed for circle keeping. And I'm new at this, so I took the one last year, learned a lot, and now I'm hoping to practice to build the skills. And it's about holding lower level circles, celebration, gratitude, community, that kind of practice, and what you learn in your personal life and gain concrete skills to live and engage in a restorative process. So that's one of the things that our team is working on. So moving on to the California level, near and dear to my heart, is AB 481. Anybody heard of that? Mark, I know you got to raise your hand. Marco, this is what the panel was about. Yeah. So the AB 481 was passed by and signed by Newsom in 2021, and it requires all of the sheriffs and police in California to be transparent on their military equipment inventory, as well as the deployments in their community each year. So there was a report published last April. Our team got to help edit that and pull together the data that is in the details of that. And then right now there is a vote. It was passed in the Assembly, but there's a new bill called AB 1486, and that's now literally in the Senate being voted on, I believe, next week. So a letter was sent to the legislature supporting it to add the amendments to the bill AB 481. It requires transparency by police with these 3 points: explicitly including assault weapons in military equipment. There have been a lot of debates about what should be included or not. Clarifying that law enforcement agencies must describe the authorized uses of the military gear, not just who uses it or examples of using. So specific deployments, and there's a great map that shows how many tanks or armored vehicles showed up in East Oakland last year. So that kind of stuff is what we're pulling together, the data. And the third point is ensuring that local lawmakers vote on military equipment policies only after community engagement meetings are held. That has not been the case, and there are a lot of agencies that are not compliant with the law. So the second one that is local is called MACRO. Anybody know MACRO? It stands for Mobile Assistance Community Responders of Oakland. This is similar to the CAHOOTS model in Eugene, Oregon, where they have for anyone that has mental health needs, rather than having a cop show up and throw them in jail. They have a mental health expert and a police officer so that the right person can treat the person that's having a crisis. So this is something that's been happening for about a year. They finished their pilot a couple months ago. So we sent a letter on behalf of the Friends meeting to the mayor and council members, and it's in support of having a dedicated phone line so it can be dispatched quickly. Billboards and other outreach and referral of non-emergency and 911 mental health and wellness check calls. So this is the kind of thing that can be invaluable to our city and make it safer, right? So the other partnership that we have is with a group called the Care First Community Coalition. It's a group of Alameda County organizers, including American Friends Service Committee, who share a commitment to reducing the number of people with behavioral health needs in Cerrito. Anybody heard about the Cerrito jail expansion? Yeah. So there was a big protest last week on that. We had a pretty good turnout, 50 or so people. So we're also fighting to prevent the future incarceration of Alameda County residents with those behavioral health concerns, with direct action events happening in June and July, including, and this is something that my group attended, budget training. So we are actually working with the Alameda County Task Force, which is directly tied to the Board of Supervisors. So I'll send a link to that organization, but one of the, I just wanted to let you know that the things that we're asking for regarding stopping the expansion of the jail, the Cerrito jail, is number one, divest from the $80 million Cerrito jail expansion. This is direct from our new sheriff. Invest $171 million in house keys, not handcuffs. Implement the jail diversion, which is the preemptive work that's being done with the Care First Community Coalition. Also democratize Alameda County's budget process. And then lastly, gathering county data to measure unmet needs. There are a lot of gaps there. So that is the main report. And I just wanted to mention on a personal basis that over my 2.5 years, I'm a tadpole in this racial justice world. I've seen that there are a lot of people, especially in North Berkeley, that are totally comfortable with the status quo. And the status quo, in my perception, is white privilege and white dominance, which is the opposite of racial justice. So I'm looking for ideas and any comments you have on how to be a catalyst to change this. So there you go. And Rochelle's on mute, so I see that you're talking.
So I'm now unmuted and wanted to first thank you for your update. It's always great to have you here and giving us a sense of where things are going. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. I see MA has her two hands clasped.
Oh, okay, she's clapping, yeah.
Yes. And if there anybody else who has a question or a comment? Julie?
Yes, and I thank you for the presentation. I think the stuff you're doing is great. And I'm wondering, it sounds like a lot in Alameda County, but I live in Contra Costa. And so I was wondering if similar things are going on in Contra Costa or in the city of Richmond.
I know that the Reimagining Public Safety has been working in Richmond, and we had a speaker at the Ashby Village panel that has been doing a lot of work with that. Her name is Marisol Cantu. And I know that there is also a lot of effort around the demilitarization. So each city, so Richmond and Contra Costa County, I have the data, it's public record, but if you want me to share that with you, I can. And it shows exactly how many robots, the tear gas, the drones, the armored vehicles are in Contra Costa County. And I know that there is a group that has been going to the city council and talking about that and asking for more transparency. So that's the extent of my knowledge about that county.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
Got her hand up.
Margot?
Margot.
Yes, I was wondering, is there anything specific that you can suggest for us to do to move this along?
Which one? There are several issues here.
I know, but say, well, the transparency issue we've worked on, but the one where you call someone other than the police, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great one. I highly recommend at least watching the first two webinars. They're about 45 minutes each, and it talks about the reason why we need to think about not calling the police, right? And it's a basis for what are the dangers. So I know as a white person in North Berkeley, I don't have any fear of calling the police, but my buddies down in East Oakland that live in a part of town that's a little scary for me, are threatened when they see an armored vehicle coming down their street, or they have the SWAT teams with their flashbangs or their tear gas, and those kind of things that are not really necessary if you're doing a standard police check. And so anyway, those two webinars are excellent, and then the pledge itself explains how it would be valuable to have your community involved in that. So for example, down in Oakland, we have I can't remember what the name of the church is, but the minister has gone through all kinds of training, including mental health crisis response and de-escalation. So those are the type of things that are covered in the webinars. And it might be something that you could bring to Ashby Village, for example. Yeah.
And I think, Margot, you were asking for particular actions we could take. Is that, have I got that? And so, Barb, if there's anything that you have seen others do after seeing those webinars,
Yeah.
we'd love to get that information and share it and take some of those steps ourselves.
Yeah, and that's why I was suggesting watching the webinars, because it does have a lot of suggestions, and even taking the pledge, which is basically a commitment to that work. Also, Margaret, just to follow on with other direct action, a letter to the legislature, meaning your senator, to support the AB 46, which are those amendments that I referred to. So a letter, and I can send you a copy of the letter if you want. And the higher up in the hierarchy, the more clout they have. So would love to have people sign on individually or as a group.
Thank you. I'm wondering again, are there others who wanted to ask or share something at this time? And again, wanting to thank Barb and looking forward to the next time she comes and updates us even further, hopefully on the progress of AB 46 and some of the other work that you're involved in, and others who would like to be more involved. We do have ways to reach you directly and would be very interested in your sense of whether we are doing the best we can to help.
Thank you. Is it okay if I hang on? Because I'm interested in the next topic too.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
You're most welcome. Okay, I don't think you meant by your interest in the next topic my brief message from Jane Fonda, but I will say we have a son, Felix and I, who has been working for about 12 years on elections of I would say progressive Democrats running for the US Senate. And this is not anything that will challenge our 501c3 status to say this is the kind of job he does. And one day he was sitting at an event and seated next to Jane Fonda. So he began speaking with her about the climate work that she does. And rather than promote one of his clients, he said, you ought to talk to my mom and dad. And she said, what's their phone number? And so in not too long from then, we got a telephone call from Jane Fonda. We spent about 40 minutes talking with her and sharing with her some of the work that we've been doing here at Ashby Village, elsewhere, the work that Felix, who's on the call with us today, has been involved in a campaign called We Can't Wait. And we gave her some ideas of maybe how to talk better about some of the things that she's been talking about, one of them being natural gas. We let her know that natural gas is not natural. And there was a long PR campaign actually by the oil industry to make sure that people felt very comfortable and how it was all such natural stuff. And so we suggested she might want to start talking about methane and fossil fuel, because that's the stuff that we're exposing our kids to in the kitchen. And I wanted to end off this. I spent some time with her at different events at the very beginning of this month. And her message for us here at Ashby Village is, she says that now when people thank me for my work on climate change, I now say, as Rochelle and Felix taught me, don't thank me, join me. And so with that, I move right along quickly to thank everybody here for doing just that. So I wanted to now move into introducing our special guest for today.
Rochelle, actually, I want to hear more about Jane Fonda. And I don't know if you can see this picture, everybody.
Oh, that's Rochelle, Felix, and Jane Fonda. That was one of the events that we were invited to. She had us coming to a very large event, really kicking off at the Castro Gay Pride Month. And so we were included in the kind of lead into that event. That's where that photograph comes from that Barbara Kivowitz just showed you. And then she had me join her in a group of women who really wanted to see what they could do in the various fields that they're in, whether it's banking, whether it was one particular woman involved in pediatrics at Stanford, others who came together saying, you know, we really want to do what we can do within our peer group, within the groups that we work with, to really, I think, as Jane Fonda said, if you can't change them, change them. And that's what she meant about, if you can't change the ways in which legislators are involved with fossil fuel, change your legislature. And so she was giving us a lot of that kind of feedback over that event that I was included in. So that's a little bit more, and we're actually continuing to be in touch. And if anybody has anything they'd like me to ask or share or talk about next time, let me know. But it's a very exciting connection, and she's delightful to work with, and is now working with the former head of Greenpeace, Annie Leonard, who has come over to work directly with Jane Fonda on this pact on climate issues. So thank you, Barbara, and happy to share any more information as soon as I get it. So now, in a gracious response to you, Barbara, I want to introduce you as our special guest for today. Barbara is a board member of San Francisco Village and is a nationally sought after speaker who will be engaging us in a compelling discussion in a minute or two about caregiving. Her own experience with chronic pain led her to write the book that I would encourage a lot of you to take a look at after this. Her book is called Love in the Time of Chronic Illness: How to Fight the Sickness, Not Each Other. And so she'll begin with her presentation, showing us some slides, sharing information with us, and then we're going to open up for your questions. And MA has been kind enough to, in the past, monitor the chat. So just in case anything interesting comes up there, we won't lose that in the course of listening and sharing our own thoughts. So Barbara, I want to open things up to you, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rochelle, and thank you for inviting me to be here. Let me share my screen. Okay, are you seeing the slide?
We are.
Okay. So, and thank you all for showing up for this. I'm going to speak for a while, very quickly, and then we'll open up for questions and discussion, because I'm interested in your experiences and your wisdom. So I am both a clinician and a researcher, and a patient living with a chronic pain condition. And I've also been a caregiver, just a distance caregiver for my parents and an on and off caregiver for my husband when needed. And our focus today is on the impact of illness on the relationship between patient and caregiver. And while there has been significant writing on the patient's experience of illness and on the caregiver's experience of caregiving, in fact, I think you had Dave Iverson come and speak to talk about his 10 years of caregiving for his mother. There has been surprisingly little written, even today, about the impact of illness on the relationship between patient and caregiver. And yet it is this impact that is one of the strongest drivers for better or worse health outcome and life outcome for both people. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. What is that relationship and why is it important? And what are some patterns that we saw in doing the research for our book? And what are some what's called active coping strategies that you can employ to build the critical relationship resilience that's needed to carry the heavy load of illness? And while living with illness can be the worst of times, it can also be the best of times. Because there's nothing quite like illness and pain to make us more aware of mortality and loss, the shortcomings of the healthcare system, the broken places in our relationship. But there's also nothing like illness to show us how resilient, strong, caring, and even creative we are. And very importantly, illness can strengthen our awareness of the importance of all the relationships in our lives, and give us all a sense of how much we love and are loved. So I want to ask you, I can't see everybody, so maybe you can tell me, Rochelle, if you've ever been a caregiver or are a caregiver now, please raise your hand. Do we have a lot of hands raised, Rochelle?
We do.
Okay. And how about if you've ever been a patient? Please raise your hand. Okay. And if you've been both, patient and caregiver, raise both hands. Oh, yeah.
Hardly a hand is
Now give
down.
yourself a little hug. And what I'd like you to do next is either say out loud, come off mute, say out loud, or write in the chat box one word that kind of describes your experience of being a patient and or a caregiver. So you can come off mute and just say a word. Sorry, or you can write it in chat.
Humbling.
Stressed.
Humbling, stress,
Depth of reflection.
reflection. I can't see the chat box. Is there anything in there, Rochelle?
It says overwhelmed and bored.
Overwhelmed and bored. Any other words?
Anxious.
Anxious.
I've seen needing to slow down,
Mm-hmm.
and I've also seen exhausted.
Exhausted. Yep. Yeah. I want you to notice that these are all very strong words. These are powerful words, and each of these words has a story behind it, and they're intense words. And notice that nobody said anything like, oh, it's an interesting experience, or it's a curious experience. No, these are heavy words, and it takes the combined strength and energy and will and heart of both patient and caregiver to hold what all these words contain. So Roanne and I, we wrote this book because we were both the ill partners in our relationships, and our primary caregivers were our husbands. Roanne had a stroke when she was 40 and the mother of 2 young children. And in 2000, I came down with a pretty crippling chronic pain condition that just knocked me out of life. And it took 10 years to diagnose and another 3 years to find the right treatments to manage the pain. And we were both just gobsmacked by how much our conditions affected every aspect of our relationship with our partners, you know, from the workplace to the kitchen, to the bedroom, to the bathroom. And there were no, and there still really aren't, resources to help patient caregiver partners understand the magnitude of the impact illness has on their relationship, much less how partners can cope and hopefully stay connected. So we wrote the book that we wished we would have had. And we spoke to many, many, many couples, surviving partners, and experts from a whole range of professions. And the learnings and stories and the patterns and the expert advice that we garnished, that we gathered in the years since the book has come out, came out 5 years ago, we've learned that it's not just applicable to couples. It really applies to any patient caregiver dyad with a few tweaks to the language. It can apply to siblings, you know, or friends, or an adult child and an elder parent. And it can apply to any kinds of pain, conditions, or traumas. So these are my 2 main healers, you know, and while I'm eternally grateful for all the clinicians who helped me, I literally would not be here today if it were not for the daily presence of my heroic husband and my magical dog. And any of you who have the privilege of having a pet in your life, you know what I mean by how magic they are. They kept me alive, and they held the hope when I didn't have any. And by the way, I know some of you are looking at this and thinking, oh, how cute. And you're referring to the dog. And that's fine. She was very cute. So I'm going to use the terms patient and caregiver, or dyads. But again, it could be couples, it could be sisters, it could be friends. You know, you can make it fit any situation. So why is the relationship important? It's so important because it determines all these things. It determines how the diagnosis is understood, how treatment is understood, if treatment recommendations are followed through on, or if they're thwarted. You know, if the recommendation is you have to change the way you're eating, but the person you're living with isn't willing to change the way they're eating, you know, chances that you won't follow the diet instructions are pretty high. It also affects the emotional state and can lean toward either resilience for both or fragmentation for both. The relationship determines how daily life is managed, or if it unravels, and how finances are managed. You know, you spend maybe 15 minutes in the doctor's office, and you're being given information and hopefully some caring with it. But it's this relationship that really is what you live with, and it's what determines everything else. So, for example, one couple we spoke with, the wife had been experiencing severe and changing pain, and she was put on an array of medications, and each medication caused its own side effects, and her doctors were really unable to diagnose or treat her. And so what do doctors do in that situation? Very often they tell you it's in your head. Because they need to come up with an answer. And when they can't, that's the answer. Her husband started to believe them because he couldn't tolerate the uncertainty and the anxiety either. So he started to believe that it was in her head, and she didn't. And this caused a terrible rift in their relationship. And she wound up feeling even more abandoned, which pushed her into even more of a downward depressive cycle. Luckily for me, my husband was heroic and my dog was magic, and my pain belonged to both of us. There were times I was crushed by its weight and he held me, and there were times when he was crushed by its weight and I held him. And I also really pushed him to continue to participate in the world and to do the things that he was still able to do, even though I couldn't. And by supporting each other, you know, we grew stronger together, and we were able to do things that neither of us could do alone. So that relationship is very deterministic. Active coping is a way of approaching problems and problem solving. And everything I'm talking about from this point on is going to be a form of active coping. And you've probably heard these terms, but what I mean by it is that active coping is about choosing how you respond to the circumstances, rather than letting the circumstances define who you are. So if possible, you can choose to change the circumstances. You know, if you have a noisy neighbor, you can choose to wear earplugs. If you can choose to move. If you can't change the circumstances, you can change how you react to them. You can choose to reframe them. You can see the noisy neighbor not as a nuisance or an invader into your space, but maybe as a potential friend. You can show interest in their choice of music. You can see what interests you and that person have in common, and hopefully ask them at some point to turn down the volume a little bit on the music. So active coping, again, changing the circumstances if you can, or changing how you're thinking or framing the circumstances. An illness, when it enters and it becomes kind of the third partner in the relationship, illness can be very demanding, and it wants to be the driver, and it wants to define how you and your partner relate to each other, and it always wants to assert itself in between the two of you. But active coping is about making deliberate choices about how you relate to the illness. So in our research, and we interviewed many couples, young, old, different races, ethnicities, LGBTQ, and many experts. And there were some themes that we found in common. And I'll be describing 3 of them. There were a lot more, but today I'll just focus on 3 big ones. And while I'm talking about them separately, do know that they can occur simultaneously, they can overlap, and they can shift back and forth. So these are 3 patterns that we heard from our interviewees, and I'll describe them each separately, along with coping approaches, active coping approaches. But again, do know that they don't exist separately, because we are not compartmentalized individuals. We are conglomerates of our emotions and our experiences. So the first is love grows. This was the biggest surprise to me in our research, was how many people we interviewed said that they reached levels of intimacy and authentic communication that would not have been possible without the presence of serious illness. They were able to find well springs of love that may have gotten dampened by decades and decades of routines and busyness and children and jobs. And many found that with the pressure of illness and pain, that they didn't have time or the energy to obfuscate or to ignore. They had to get right to the point. And they were able to talk about what had previously been either buried or unspeakable topics like their emotional needs, intimacy, love, sadness, disappointment, hope, illness, mortality, suicidal thoughts, gratitude, and more. Many people said that they started saying, "I love you," to their partner every day, sometimes even several times a day, because they didn't know when the time would come when they could no longer say it. And of course, not all partners found love when they got down to their bedrock, because that's what illness does. It forces you to separate out what's really, really important from what's just the chaff, the noise. And when you get down to what's really important, hopefully you find some love and some compassion, both for yourself and for the other person. But of course, not everybody finds that. Many people find when they get down to their bedrock that it's been fracked and it's full of cracks and fissures, ones that you may have been able to find workarounds for years. But illness is a bright light, and it shines a spotlight, not just on the love, but also on the cracks. And seeing them in full view may offer opportunities to address them, to change them, to apologize. There was one woman we interviewed who had been in a car accident, and she suffered a traumatic brain injury. And it was really because of the extremeness of that intimacy that she realized that her husband, who was emotionally abusive and had serial affairs, that he was not going to change. You know, if he couldn't be kind to her during this trauma, then he would never be kind to her. So for her, this was a positive side of her trauma. She was finally able to say, it's over. And she ended the relationship, and she was indeed much happier than she had ever been, suffering under his emotional abuse. So love grows. That was the surprise. Another pattern is what we wound up calling carrying the load, balancing new roles and responsibilities in the context of illness. So when illness becomes the third partner, as I said, it can wind up in the driver's seat, and you can wind up as passengers in your own lives. And one of the areas this plays out is in the roles and tasks that partners take on. As it has been said to us many times, that a partnership of equals can become one of patient and caregiver. And that can be a pretty slippery slope, where the patient becomes so immersed in the illness that that becomes their primary relationship. And the partner just wants to do and help and help and help. And there's never an ending to the amount of things you can do. So the partner becomes over-functioning, and the patient becomes under-functioning. Now, there's no denying that in many illness situations, the ill partner can't do what she used to do, and the well partner has to take on more of the load. But, and this is where active coping comes in, how you go about doing this role change has critical reverberations. So it's not automatic that you slide unconsciously, into this paradigm of passive patient and over-functioning caregiver, which can be the source of much of the words you used earlier on. It can be the source of exhaustion. It can be the source of boredom. And one way to prevent this slippery slide from happening automatically is to be deliberate about discussing the tasks and agreeing on the responsibilities. And here's an exercise that you and your partner can do. So what the exercise, the activity is, and you do this together, because what you do together and what you talk about with each other builds resilience. So while this exercise is very tactical, there's also a partnership relationship side to it, because you're doing it together. So what you do is together, you write a list of all the tasks that there are to do. The R is Richard, my husband, and the B is me, Barbara. And we divided them up into home, health, and finance. And as you can see, there's 30 tasks on here, something like that. And this is just a partial list. You know, if I asked you to write a list and I gave you 30 seconds to write a list of some of the chores you do as patient or as caregiver, you would at least come up with, in 30 seconds, you'd probably come up with 5 tasks. And if I gave you an hour, you'd probably come up with 50 tasks. And once you come up with the tasks, you each sign up for the ones that you think you can do. So, for example, I could do the laundry. Richard could take out the garbage. Richard did the grocery shopping because I was really housebound. My pain was an ankle chain, you know, and I didn't leave the house. I did the pet care. I did research into finding doctors and medical clinical trials. Richard, who is, I describe him as kind of born and raised at MIT. So he developed this whole technical system and spreadsheet to help track my medication and the effects of my medication. And then, of course, after you do that, after you sign up for the tasks you can do, there's going to be some that have nobody sign up for them. And then you look at them together and you decide, well, all right, how important are these tasks? Like you can see, nobody signed up for house cleaning and nobody signed up for making beds. And we decided, who cares? Let the house be a little bit messy and we're just going to sleep in the bed again. So don't bother making it. Neither of us had to take on a second job. We don't have children, so we didn't have to deal with child issues. And there are some tasks that need to be done, like, for example, meal preparation, but neither of us signed up for it. So in that situation, you call on your community, and you're all members of one of the most amazing communities in the country, Ashby Village. You call on Ashby Village, you call on your friends, you call on your religious organizations, you call on community-based organizations who might be able to help and pitch in with those tasks that must be done, but neither of you can do. And what this gives you is kind of a shared space where things become clear. And when things become clear, they don't drag tales of resentment, spoken resentment or silent resentment, because they're clear and they're agreed upon. And this will change over time. So this is something you revisit over time. You know, if the patient should become sicker or more unable, or if the caregiver should develop an illness. So this is something you revisit, but the most important part of all of this is not that you have this spreadsheet, you know, this blueprint. It's that you were talking together. You were figuring this out together. You were having a conversation about it and collaborating, and probably laughing a little bit about some of the things that are on the list that have to get done. And that's what builds with relationship resilience. Another pattern we see a lot of is what we wound up calling connection or collision. The different experiences of illness that are misunderstood can lead to collision. And what this means, when I say this, you're going to say to yourself, oh, of course. But in the moment, it's not, of course, it's not obvious. It creeps up on you. Each person's experience of the illness is different. The ill person experiences it from the inside, while the caregiver observes it from the outside. So the ill partner may say that he's feeling better because compared to yesterday, he is. The well partner may see that the ill partner is still sleeping a lot, has no energy, isn't eating, maybe even slurring words, and may think that he's doing the same or worse. So they're going to see different things and have different interpretations. And if they don't appreciate this difference, they can wind up colliding and arguing instead of sharing and learning from each other. So one couple we spoke with had just learned about the wife's serious cancer diagnosis. It was stage 4 cancer she was diagnosed at, and she was whiplashed, and she needed alone time to process what this meant to her and to think about how this changed her identity and her vision of what her future was to be. The husband was overwhelmed, as you can imagine, with a sense of fear and anxiety and helplessness, which he translated into problem solving and wanting to do things to help his wife. He wanted to do, and she wanted to sit. So her need for privacy and his need to help were a collision course, and neither of them understood what the other's experience was. So imagine, the more she retreated into privacy, the more he interpreted that as something wrong, that something must be really wrong. And so he accelerated his helping. And the more he accelerated his helping, the more she retreated. I mean, that is a downward collision spiral. So the active coping approach for a situation like this is communication. And in fact, communication is pretty much always the better path that will create more of a platform for you to deal with the very difficult things that illness brings up. So communication, for example, instead of her just going into a room and closing the door, she could preface her behavior with an explanation. And she could say something like, honey, and by the way, it's always good to begin with the word honey. Honey, I'm okay. I just need some alone time to think about what all this means to me. I get it that you want to help, and I appreciate that. And believe me, when I need help, I'll let you know. But right now, the best way to help me is just to leave me alone for now. And he could explain what's behind his behavior, what's driving his urgency to do. And he could say, I'm worried about you. I'm concerned about you. And that makes me want to know how you are and what I can do to help you. So I may check in on you from time to time. And then he can ask permission. And he could say, is that all right? Can I do that? And she could say either, no, I'd rather you wouldn't, or she could say, give me at least an hour and then you can check in on me. Or she could say, sure, check in on me anytime you feel the need. But what that's doing is it's taking this inevitable collision course, and again, it's turning it into a shared experience, a conversation, and a collaboration. And the keys to this lie in the words prefacing your behavior with an explanation and asking permission to do an intervention. I realize I'm going through this very quickly. And if you have questions, please write them down because I want to make sure we have time for questions. This to me is like the heart of the book and the heart of the talk. This is a different job description that I'm offering you, being instead of doing. And it's not going to replace all the doing. It's not going to replace that list of tasks. It's in addition to it. But what it does is it situates everything else in a context of what is most important. You know the old saying that the old person sitting in a chair on the front porch toward the end of their lives, is not going to say, damn it, I wished I had gone to 7 more meetings. What they're going to say is, I wished I had spent time with my kids, or I wished I had spent time with my partner, or I wish I had really pursued painting because I love to paint. So this is about being, not doing. And being means just that. It means being together in the moment. And that could look like anything. It could look like going for a walk. It could look like, with Richard and I, we each had, that dog was magical, but she required a lot of maintenance. And my job was to brush her teeth, and Richard's job was to cut her nails. For us, that was a way of being. You know, illness wasn't part of that. Illness was in the back seat when we were taking care of our dog, and it was a way of being together. Visit your bedrock. You know, in the hurricane of illness, it's so easy to get lost. And if you purposely visit your bedrock, and you could make it a daily practice, and your bedrock is the core of your relationship. You know, when you blow away the chaff and look at the wheat, hopefully that wheat has some love there and some compassion, and you can literally ground yourself in that. So when the hurricane is happening, you know, maybe even you're taking out your fear and your frustration on each other and arguing over, as Richard and I often did, why are you leaving your socks in the living room? Don't you know they belong in the bedroom? You know, in the realm of my illness, that was irrelevant. And when we, you know, called for a timeout and said bedrock time, and we literally did that, bedrock time, we would take a breath and say, okay, socks are not as important as the fact that you're hurting, you know, or you're afraid. Hold the hope for each other. It can be really hard to be hopeful in the face of chronic pain or a degenerative or terminal illness or just uncertainty. And one of the benefits of being in a patient-caregiver relationship is that if one person loses sight of the hope, the other can remind them that there's always something to be hopeful for. And it doesn't have to be hope for a cure, although you can certainly hope for a cure, but you can hope for other things. I'm going to talk a little bit about hope in a moment. But I had, my background is Jewish. And so some of you, I'm sure, and most of you may have seen what a Hanukkah menorah is. It's a candelabra with 8 different holders in it for candles, and then one holder for the bigger candle. I had my hope menorah. I had 8 people in my life that I could ask to hold the hope for me. And I could call them when I was in despair and just say, tell me something hopeful. And not only did that help me, because I had zero hope that I was ever going to get better, but it gave them a job to do. Caregivers need a job to do. And if you can give them a job to do, you'll get something, and they'll get something even more. Choose distance with compassion. Illness is tough. And both people need a break from thinking about it and even from being together. And distancing is okay. It's even necessary. It can be really necessary to kind of refuel the engine, to charge it. But again, do it with that explanation. Do it with a preface and with compassion. You know, my husband would say to me, Richard would say to me before he was going out, because he just needed a break. And he would say, I'm going for a walk. I'm always with you. I just need to take a break from the pain. So taking a break, going into a room, closing the door, is absolutely necessary when you're dealing with serious, especially long-term illness. But preface it, explain it with communication and compassion if you can. Tell your story to each other. As I said earlier, each partner's experience, not just of the illness, but of everyday occurrences, is different. And your partner can't mind read. So share your experience, share your story. It could be of the visit to the doctor. You'd be surprised, you probably wouldn't be surprised, but one might be surprised that if you go to the appointment with a doctor together, and then you go home and you're going to compare notes, your stories can be very, very different from each other. So tell your story to each other. Tell your story of how you spent the day, of a book that you're reading or a podcast that you're listening to. Telling your story about how you're feeling, and have the other person be just what's called an active listener. Just like active coping, you can do active listening, which is listening without problem solving, without thinking about what you're going to say next. It's listening with as much empathy as you can muster. Ask your partner for help. It's hard for all of us to ask for help. I know at San Francisco Village, this theme comes up at so many meetings. It's really hard to ask for help. And the ill partner won't ask for help because they're concerned that they're overburdening the well partner, and the well partner won't ask for help because they're not the sick one. So why? They have no right to ask for help. They should be giving, they shouldn't be taking. Wrong, absolutely wrong. Asking for help is a gift that you are giving the other person. It's an expression of honesty and vulnerability, and it offers others a way to make a difference. That's a gift. And both partners need to offer each other the gift of asking for help. Ask for helpful help and politely reject unhelpful help from your community. Your friends and your family want to help too, but sometimes their help is more of an intrusion. You know, bringing food you can't eat, cleaning when you want to take a nap, and constantly asking, how are you? How are you? How are you? You know, sometimes that could feel like a dentist drill. If people keep asking you, how are you? How are you? And it's okay to tell your community what you want from them and what you don't want from them. And being clear with them, just like with your partner, helps them and gets you what is truly useful. And it's okay to say to someone who's offering you unwanted help, you know, I so appreciate your effort, but right now, what I need is quiet, or what I need is not to talk about how I'm doing. You know, why don't you tell me about a book that you're reading? That would be great. Okay, so that's a different job description. A few more active coping techniques. Stay as close to normal as possible, individually and together. As I've said, illness can be an aggressive driver, and it will try to steer you off the road, you know, into the narrow ditch of illness. So try to steer a path that tethers you both to what you like to do and still can do. And hopefully that can be together, but if it can't, then tether yourself individually to something that helps you hold on to normal. You know, that could be pickleball, you know, that could be going to the symphony, that could be going for a walk. And if together, you can find some normal, like taking a walk or going grocery shopping together. If you can travel, oh, how wonderful. If you can socialize, how wonderful. My pain was completely incapacitating. You know, I couldn't read, I couldn't walk, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't socialize, I couldn't do daily activities. But our normal, our tether, the one inviolate normal thing that Richard and I did every single week, and I am so grateful to HBO, is we watched The Sopranos Sunday night, 9 o'clock. No matter how I felt, no matter what was going on, we watched The Sopranos. That was our tether. More active coping. This is really important. Work as a team in dealing with your healthcare providers. By the way, you'll get, if you want, you can have a copy of these slides, so you don't have to write it all down. You all know the healthcare system is a labyrinth with many false passages and many monsters in it. And some helpful guardians and guides too, but it's labyrinthian and it's hard to navigate it solo. I would say it's impossible to navigate it solo, especially if you're not feeling well, if you've just gotten bad news, if you're upset, if the treatment doesn't seem to be working, to try and remember what your doctor is saying, to try and think of all the questions you wanted to ask, that's too much. You know, that's too much for one person. So bring someone with you. You know, it could be your primary caregiver. I know Ashby Village has this MedPals program. Bring someone with you. That is an active coping practice. And some of the things that you all can do are things like research the condition and go prepared with a list of all your questions, but know that chances are you will only get to the first 2 questions. So prioritize them, but have the rest there just in case. I find it very helpful if the other person can either take notes or actually tape the appointment, you know, on their smartphone, and remind each other that you can say things like, I don't understand. We need more time to make this decision. What's the probability that this will help? What are the likely results and what are the risks? And doctors will do tests. Lots and lots and lots of tests. And some of them are easy and some of them are invasive. And you can ask a question like, what will be the difference if we do this test? How will this information affect how we think about what to do next? You can ask, what if we do nothing? What if we wait? And one of my favorite questions is, who would you send your best friend to for a second opinion? We're all entitled to second and third and fourth opinions. And I found that when you ask it this way, you know, who would you send your best friend to? It sneaks past the doctor, any defensiveness the doctor might have about, you know, you're wanting a second opinion, but you're entitled to it. Keep your own treatment record. Ask for copies of every scan that you have that gets taken. Now we can, if you go to your My Health Online or your My Chart Online account, you have access to your health records, but it doesn't hurt to keep your own record of how the medication affected you, the date when you tripped and fell and why that happened, you know, just to keep your own record, because your record's going to be more personal than the clinical record. And that can be a useful kind of backdrop to have. And very importantly, be honest with your providers. And going back to active coping and communicating and prefacing, you know, you can say to your doctor things like, I wish I didn't have to tell you this, but this approach is just not working for me. You know, I wonder if we can think of something different to try. That's honesty, and that's an okay thing to say. All right, create hope. Hope is not something you find. It's something you create. And you can hope for anything. You can hope for a cure, but that's not the only thing you can hope for. You can hope for a remediation of symptoms. You can hope for less pain. You can attach hope to anything. Like you can hope that you'll attend your child's wedding or graduation or take that special trip you've always been wanting to take. You can hope to be able to walk around the block or just to the corner, to sit outside, you know, and feel the sun. You can hope if we're getting a one night of uninterrupted sleep. And creating hope is actually really important because hope has a biological effect, just like stress has a biological effect. That you've heard the term stress hormones like cortisol. Well, hope activates neurotransmitters in our brain that produce chemicals like endorphins and serotonin and others that modulate our breathing, modulate our respiration, our heart rate, and some actually mimic the pain reduction effects of morphine. So creating hope. This is my favorite thing, I think, in the whole book. This was a patient who lives with a degenerative neurological condition. And I asked him, you've gone through so much, you've been hospitalized so often, yet you seem so hopeful. How do you do that? And this is what he said. There's always something to be hopeful about, no matter what condition you're in. When you have your health, you can be hopeful about having any of your dreams come true. Once your body fails you, you can rest your hope in your emotions. You can hope that you will still feel love and compassion for others and yourself. If your emotions become emptied, you still have your spirit. You can hope to connect to something greater than yourself, something that has a light to shine on your shadows. And when your spirit is gone, then you have already become something else. And who knows what hope awaits you there. All I can say whenever I read this is, oi. And finally, another spirit guide, Maya Angelou. We set the expectation bar so high, but if you can care for another, you've already succeeded, and everything else is already over the bar. You're just being here today shows that you care. You're already over the bar. So thank you. Thank you. And I will figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Where is that? Well, while I'm figuring this out, if anybody has any thoughts or any questions that they would like to offer, please feel free. And I would say just speak up because I can't see raised hands.
And it would help if you say your name when you're speaking up as well, so Barbara can know who she's talking to.
And if any of the other co-hosts can stop my screen sharing, please do that. I'm just looking for the thing to click on and I'm not finding it. Well, I'm going to ask you all a question that I'm very curious about the answer to. Let me get rid of that.
You did
All
it.
right. Did I stop?
You did.
Okay. I'm just really curious about what resonated with you in anything that I talked about or said. What struck home? Yeah, Laura.
I think what moved me most was the notion of what was possible if you talked about the most important things with each other, that then you were on the same team facing a common challenge. You know, was it how much the challenge and the craft is staying connected when you're both having such different experiences.
Very well put. I like that. The craft.
Because I guess one other thing I'd say is that the explanations and the strategies and all of that, it's great to remind us we have options in terms of active coping, but it takes practice. It takes work. I mean, any more than you don't get stronger if you don't do stuff. If you don't practice, they're just ideas, you know. So that was the effort and the mindfulness required was inviting, actually.
Well, I'm glad you felt invited, and that's a critical point. It does take practice. And I fire hosed you with a lot of information and possibilities. You don't have to do it all. You could pick one thing that has meaning to you. You know, I think you could still find The Sopranos on HBO.
I love that you did that. I just want to say, and I
Yes.
just want to say, you asked what particularly moved me. I was moved from the moment that you started to speak, and I felt this sort of flood of feeling and warmth and hope. And I want to thank you so much for just being such a wise woman.
Well, thank you. And, you know, it was whatever wisdom I have, I give credit to my dog and my husband and the people around me, and, you know, the people we interviewed for the book. Well, that was one of the most profound experiences I will ever have in my life, was the honor of talking to all these people. That's where the wisdom comes from. And I'm so glad that you're creating hope. Rochelle, how are we doing your time?
We're good. We have a little bit to go. I think you can take at least 3 or 4 more questions and that'd be fine.
Okay.
I had one comment, which is I was really struck by hearing how my partner can't mind read. And you know, you get so close to somebody and you figure, well, of course they know what I'm thinking now. And it's good to be reminded.
This is Mark. I had a reaction that much of what I heard from you applied more easily to many years as a caregiver and as a psychologist and a student of caregiving, and that I'm in a different place now. I have now a large number of disabilities, frightening disabilities. My ability to assert that my role as a caregiver are limited, and the options that I have for assistance are distributed among an assisted living facility, 2 children, a number of friends and organizations. And sometimes I just have to look for the unexpected sources of hope. And I just wanted to share one of them. My cardiologist knows that I'm interested in political activity, and he bought me 2 tickets to go to a Barbara Lee congressional fundraiser.
Oh,
And I thought of this as, I think of this as part of his medical outreach. I've dealt with him on the issues of whether it's worth continuing my life. And I'm sure that he sees this as part of the affirmation of what would be meaningful to me. So these unexpected, sometimes wonderful experiences are something to hope for.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing that. That really touched me and resonated with me. The concept of the unexpected gifts of hope that we receive from surprising places, and to be open to that. I mean, there's something. A gift is not a gift until it's received. So you are allowing yourself to be open and receptive. And sometimes it's that invites the giver to make an offer. It all becomes very relational, very relational. It sounds like you and your cardiologist and perhaps the other people in your life too are walking together in many ways. So thank you for sharing that. And I see Robin, you have your hand up. You're on mute.
Thinking a lot about a situation my husband and I were in. First, I was very seriously injured and almost killed 2.5 years ago, and a long recovery, both in the hospital and at home. And then my husband had to get ready for a kidney transplant from our son. And we were able to put a few months in between when I was pretty much able at least to walk. I could get around a little bit. And before he had to go in for surgery, it was delayed a little bit by a couple of months. But what I remember is that was that transition was one of the more better times for us in terms of communicating, because I think because there was so much we both had to deal with, both in terms of being patients and caregivers, each of us, that I don't know why, but we did communicate better than we often do.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think, nobody wants illness, but as I started off saying when I was talking, illness isn't just horrible, awful, bleak despair. Illness carries some gifts with it. And among those gifts can be, we have to talk to each other. We don't have the bandwidth, or we don't have the time, or there's too much to figure out. Illness, the pressure of illness, the spotlight of illness can turn us toward each other.
Well, and also it was the shifting of tasks. Who could be? Yeah.
Right. Anyone else have any final thoughts or questions? I'll share one really quick story. Rochelle, do I have time for that? So I was giving a talk at Stanford at their cancer care center, and one woman asked the question, my husband has increasing dementia. He has Alzheimer's. What you're talking about is communication and collaboration, and what can you tell me? What can you say to me? And there's a story in the book about a couple. He was a refugee, he escaped Nazi Germany, came here, was a brilliant, renowned physicist. And his job was to be in the world and do his brilliant stuff, and her job was to raise the family. And then he got dementia, he got Alzheimer's, and lost his standing, the ground he was standing on, he lost it. And he was only able really to turn to her. That was the last ground left, was her. And one of the things that they did, she took care of him, a lot of hands-on care, as he got worse and worse. And one thing they did that was, to me, exquisite act of coping was every night after the day, they would get into bed and they would lay side by side and hold hands. And she would just say to him, "Well, Morris, we got through another day." And they would kiss goodnight. And that was it. That was all the connection that they could really do. But they found it. They found that spot. So I'll end with that story.
Is it possible to get a recording of your presentation today that I might be able to circulate among people in this assisted living situation where I am?
Mark, I'll answer that one. Yes, it is. We've recorded, and so we'll be able to get you that, and it will be even on the YouTube channel of Ashby Village. So we'll make sure that you get that within a few days from now. How's that?
Thank you so much.
And Mark, I'll say that, if there's a group there that wants to talk about stuff like this, I'm happy to Zoom in if you can arrange for a Zoom gathering. You all could be in person. If I could be on Zoom, I'd be happy to talk to you and your friends. And I also put my email address. I think it's the first chat. I put my email address. So if any of you have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to email me, feel free.
My vision doesn't allow me to read the chats. Could you send it to me by email and I can enlarge it?
Yeah, Rochelle, can you do that?
I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I very rarely am speechless, but I'm pretty much that right now. I really want to thank you, Barbara. It's made a real difference, I think, not only for all of us who are here, but for all of us who have somebody else like Mark that we want to make sure hears this and experiences this. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all. We are all joined in this life together. To quote Rochelle's new friend, Jane Fonda. So I'm going to drop off now.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Thank you again.
Thank you. Okay. This is, for me anyway, requires taking a deep breath and saying that, for anybody that you think might take some hope from this experience, please as Mark asked, as others of us have said, please make sure, let's keep this going among us. And I just have some pedestrian few things that I want to make sure that are announcements that get read. One of them is that there is some legislation that we've been looking at as a group at the climate action parts of elder action. There's something called SB 252, and it's about divesting our pensions, our money, from fossil fuels. And so we're keeping on top of that and want to share that with you the next time we get together. Another thing that I've been really excited about and very involved with is that at a certain point, the Climate Action Task Force said, you know what, let's try a book group. Let's try a book group that would enable us to really look at some of these things that are so hard to look at by ourselves together, because that's the way of Ashby Village anyhow. We jumped right in, and we have now about, at my last count, more than 40 people from 2 organizations. One is Ashby Village, of course. We have about, at this point, close to 15 people who've come forward and said, I'd like to do this. I'd like to try my part in the pilot of an intergenerational book group. And the other partners are a group called the Women's Environmental Network. They're an organization of women in their 20s and 30s who are very eager to hear the perspectives of us, the folks who they think perhaps if they're therapists now, we might have retired therapists with decades more experience to be reacting to this impressive book called Facing the Climate Emergency. And Facing the Climate Emergency is a wonderful book. It's a very slim volume. So even if you want to put up your hand now and say, I want to be part of this too, you've got time between now and the 26th of the month, when we're going to all get together on Zoom to read it. And we're very fortunate in that, well, in several things. One is that the author, Margaret Klein Solomon, has given us all these books for free. She says anybody that would like to read her book as part of this experiment gets it for free. And the other part is that she's going to be joining us and being part of our interactions with each other. And so I would encourage many of you whose faces I see here are already have agreed to be part of this. Joanne not only has agreed to be part of it, but has gotten some other people involved as well. Judith Coates is going to be doing this, representing the folks who are the former North Oakland Village parts of Ashby Village. Julie Freestone's going to be doing this as well. So am I. Any of you, again, who are on screen or know other folks, Laura, if you'd like to be part of this too, we'll make sure we get you that book in time to read. It's not even 200 pages. It's way less. It's not even 150 pages. So you will be able to get through this within the next week. And it offers some very powerful ways that somebody who was a psychologist who confesses that she was just always so afraid to even look at articles or figure anything out about climate change that she didn't, until such time as she said, wait a minute, I'm a psychologist. I know about fear, and I know about how to get beyond fear. And so that's some of what she addresses in this book. And it's quite remarkable and offers a lot of things for us to think about individually, to think about together, and to really enable us, I think, to have a whole new perspective on what we're trying to do and how we're trying to engage others in the process. And so, Laura, I will make sure that you get the invitation. For those of you who've already gotten my email, have you gotten the Zoom information, Joanne? Do you know if you did? Yeah, great. So it gives us how to connect, and these folks are so excited. There are 22 of them already signed up from this Women's Environmental Network saying, I want to hear from people who are wiser than I am and who've been around the block and back again on a lot of things that I'm just first trying to figure out. And some of them have said, because I'm going to be spending a lot of my life in the midst of climate change. And I've got to figure out, and I need the kind of ways that Barbara was talking about. I need help. You know, I got to figure out a lot to live in a very different world than maybe you all had the chance to do that I may not. So I'm really looking forward to this opportunity, and really hope that some of you will say, maybe I'll try this out. So that's the scoop on the intergenerational book group. And the other last, but by no means least, announcement is that one of the things that we're always confronted with at Elder Action is there are lots of urgent issues that come across our emails and texts and even the old phone that become things that we're asked to act upon. And so in our July discussion, we're going to really talk so that we're not overwhelming you all or others on our lists with the kinds of urgent matters that we absolutely have to take some action on. And we're going to be talking in our next gathering about how to best handle urgent issues that come our way, and to really think about and think hard about everything from focus to setting priorities to learning sometimes to set limits and say no. So it's going to be, I think, a very heartfelt and powerful discussion. And we will also be past that first pilot project of the intergenerational book group. And we're going to hear a lot about how that experience went for those of us who dove right in and gave it a try. So I want to make sure everybody knows that the next meeting, we always have these gatherings, but worth repeating. The third Tuesday of every month is the Elder Action General Meeting. And so for July, that will be on Tuesday, July the 18th. And again, much and heartfelt welcome to everyone who not only came today, but maybe will be joining us again in July, perhaps bringing a friend. I want to thank MA, who can't hear me thank her, but she can hear me on the recording. And I want to thank her for doing the work of looking at the chat and seeing if there's anything that needs to be addressed either by us as a group or personally. I want to thank Julie for her ever amazing minutes. So again, for people who weren't able to be here, you'll get a chance to hear directly what happened and how we handled a lot of the really powerful and important issues that Barbara Kivowitz and Barb Atwell raised, because these are all things that all of us lucky enough to be able to come to this meeting are going to be faced with at some point or other. Nobody gets out of this life alive, as they say. So we thank you for coming. We thank you for joining us, for asking questions, and for doing that kind of active listening that makes a big difference, even if you didn't say anything aloud. It really helps. I know it helps me to be looking around at these rectangles and knowing that there are people who are listening to what the rest of us are saying. So thanks, everybody, and goodbye for now.